Kideaters vs. Zoo BoyZ, Chapter 3. The Others and the Operation. Just before we get back to our story, let's finish giving the background of a few vital characters in our story. Karen McRoy is a college-age young lady doing her internship at Southport Post newspaper company. In the Zoo BoyZ book, it was revealed to us that she's Jeremy's sister. She was selected and mandated to write about Zoo Island in a positive light. In this story, she's once again going to stay on the home shore while her brother Jeremy, Jerbear to her, goes back to the island. This time with the official permission and persuasion of the owner. She remembers coming home from work the day they got the news that Jer was missing. She was the one who had to calm down her mother and keep her from completely collapsing. Karen was also the one who checked out the spot the boys claimed to be camping at, reporting the obvious signs that proved the boys never stayed there that night, let alone any night. It was back then she realized the boys set up the whole camping trip scheme so they could go explore Zoo Island. Glenn was the same age as Karen. He was also an intern at the newspaper company. He was selected and mandated to write about the missing boys. Unfortunately for him, the boys were found before he had a chance to write much at all. He did learn how to word things the right way in order to slant the article away from the wrong direction. Also, because he listened in on private meetings between his boss, Bob Stern, and Mr. Hansen, the owner of Zoo Island. He knew the truth was being bent into a lie. He wanted to go to the island, but was told there was no good reason. He offered to write about it. However, Bob Stern told him, "The classified records that have been verified will have to do. We don't sponsor field trips to exotic places, boy." Glenn wanted to be involved, but obviously wasn't going to be able to be involved. Bob Stern is the 60-year-old man who has worked at the newspaper for 25 years. He is the immediate boss of Karen and Glenn. Sometimes he felt like he was babysitting. He knows how to write politically safe stuff and how to use the paper to influence and persuade the general public one way or the other. Mr. Wilkins is the chief editor above Bob. He will come into play at the end. What the Southport Post reports or reported, people accepted as the truth. This time, the honest truth needed to be published, not a slanted version. John Hansen. All you really need to know about this highly secretive man is that he was the creator behind the Forever Happy Amusement Park, Inc., the very same park the three of our boys, Dave, Jeremy, and Ron, snuck into before. Hansen is also the man behind Zoo Island, along with all the strange things witnessed firsthand by the four boys. This time, John Miner joined the other three. Ralph Willoughby. Now, that name would not be familiar to anyone who read the book Zoo BoyZ, mainly because that was the real name of the guy who we met on Zoo Island that claimed he legally changed his name to Robinson Crusoe. to match the character in the book by Daniel Defoe. The original official author of that book wrote it as if the fictional character bearing the name held in the title was believed by many to be the actual true author. Ralph not only believed that, he was also convinced that the protagonist was a real person. For Ralph, the events in the book were documentation of actual incidences. More accurately, taking it one step further off the deep end, Ralph believed it was specifically about him. Somehow this man saw the writings as a prophetic dictation of what his life was destined to be. He, along with a list of animals, were the targets for the boys to help capture. Zoo Island itself is also a character in the book. The island's characteristics are seen in the vast majority of confusing creatures who call it home. Currently on the island, Ralph Willoughby, aka Robinson Crusoe, talked to himself in his underground bunker. He wasn't completely alone. Who knows what the spiders that shared his living space were able to hear and comprehend. We're unaware of how much those creatures depended on Ralph, but we are fully aware of how much he depended on them. He had to keep the spiders alive because they would kill the mosquitoes and vicious insects that bite and carry malaria. Some were big enough in size to literally carry away a full-grown man. Ralph, who from this point on we'll call Rob, Robinson, or even Mr. Crusoe, as he insists, was out of his mind in many ways. He was also extraordinarily brilliant when it came to survival techniques. There is no question he was crazy. Not just delusional, but he was so insane that he didn't even comprehend that he had lost grip with his cognitive mind, the true sign of being dangerously psychotic. He was fully aware, however, that security on the island would now be stepped up after the boys had been there. Hansen drilled the security search crew. How could 4 teenagers gain access to my island? And who is this Robinson Crusoe character? Rob had hidden devices in Hansen's onshore office, the barracks Hansen's security team shared, and even in Hansen's home. He was listening and making sure he took every precaution needed to fulfill his destiny of living on the abandoned island. Rob paced back and forth as he spewed out his words with one of the many different accents he alone made up. It wasn't even so much an accent as it was a weird way to pronounce things, moving around the emphasis on different syllables, spitting words up and forcing them out. He raged, "The hay are probably going to take the full evaluation of what was done here during the invasion of those 4 mucked-up mongrels. Maybe blame the vandalization of certain habitations on them. Who really knows?" Robinson obsessed over what he thought they would charge the kids with. He knew they not only trespassed on the island, but broke a few things. They damaged the property belonging to Mr. John Hansen. Mr. Crusoe longed to meet John Hansen, but never had the opportunity. At least, he didn't think he had. Sometimes his memory failed. He would occasionally visit the wax museum on the island. It was filled with figures depicting hybrid animals. The only human wax figure featured was of John Hanson. Rob talked to it as if it was real. He'd have overextended meetings there explaining to the image of the CEO as if he was actually in his presence. He offered solutions for reviving Zoo Island, not making it a place for people to visit again, but a place to raise the strange mutated animals, unaltered any further than they already were, or by the evolution they so desired. He presented his case, being sure to designate himself as the only human habitat in the island, and ultimately the caretaker of the entire island. Rob wanted to evaluate and take inventory of what the kids stole from the restaurant area, but he knew now was not the time. The island security team was sure to come back and double-check everything. The whole place would soon be swarming with other so-called authorities. John couldn't risk being caught. Quasi, the half-dog, half-Komodo dragon that the boys considered their domestic pet, would not give any attention to Rob. In fact, the creature knew well enough to keep as much distance between him and that nut as possible. I think that's enough background. Now, let's go back to the jail, where our four main boys are being held, and really get into this story. Go to chapter 4.